really, can you change the world by sharing your story? Like, how many people does it actually take to change the world? It's great if you're in some great big boardroom somewhere. Mother Teresa once said, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. And for me, I look at small businesses, I look at startups, scale up, small groups within a large organization. Treat that like your family. Those are the people that you need to inspire with a story to bring about change. Don't think about changing the minds of thousands of people. Greta Thunberg said, no one's too small to make a difference. Like, I love that quote. And the reason it's true, and here's some homework for anybody else to finish on. When you say, how many people does it take to change the world? It's 3.5%. It's not many. 3.5%. There's a whole rule about it. There's a TED talk by Erica Chenoweth. But you want to change the hearts and minds of 100 people, you and 3 of your friends.
Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Hey, Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, man. This is going to be fun.
It's
Thanks
going
for
to
having me on.
be it's going to be fun. As I said before we started, Jeremy, I've been following your work for some time, so I'm super excited about this conversation. And I also wanted to share something in public. I very much like your work around storytelling and the way you do it for a few reasons, just a couple of them. The two main reasons are that one, when you do your analysis, when it comes to storytelling, presenting, public speaking, communication in general, you go deep in your analysis. You're not one of those who stay at a very high level. I like the fact that you go very deep in your analysis. And also, I like that it seems to me that you like to get inspiration from different fields that apparently sometimes have nothing to do potentially with storytelling, but of course there are lots of connections, things like music, for example, and films. So that's great too. And also for our listeners, and I'm going to include the link in the show notes, but just want to share it now that we get started. Your website, betterstories.org, is fascinating, full of resources, like so many of them. Everything is there for free. It's videos, articles, checklists, toolkits, visual representations. It's one of the best websites I've seen in this area. So
bless you,
Jeremy. Thank you for the work that you do.
I really appreciate it. And thanks for noticing the depth there as well. A lot of that is just self-preservation on my part. I have ADHD. I can't small talk. I'd rather just jump straight into the deep end and start talking about what really matters. And mildly obsessed with storytelling, to say the least. There's a lot of people are passionate about storytelling. And then there's a level of, like Brendan Bouchard might say, I don't know if you come across Brendan, the high performance coach, like everyone's okay when you're passionate about something. And it's like, great, you found your passion, When you become a bit obsessed, it makes some people uncomfortable. And it's like, Jeremy, tone it down a little bit, take it easy. You're kind of going deep and heavy on some things. But no, you're right. Not enough people do that. I really love going behind the scenes on the biggest stories to see why they work. Also, the stories that don't work. Because if I'm going to help anyone else to tell a better story, I need to know, the good, bad, and the ugly, and not just have some theory. And like you say, some of that comes from every field. It's going to be music. I can be talking about Bob Dylan and Taylor Swift 1 minute. Wasn't long ago, I got a team to go off and watch a ballet. It was actually the practice of a ballet at the Royal Opera House in London. You're like, why would a storyteller of a tech company do that? That makes no sense. Surely that's a waste of half a day, right? You want to tell stories without words. You want to command a stage. You want to be a confident presenter. It's a lot about how, do you know what I mean? How you fill that space, how you tell a story without words. That ballet is a great example of that. So yeah, I'll try and find every tool and technique at my disposal to help everybody tell better stories, for sure.
I can see that. Yes, that is the, I didn't want to say, but that is the right word, I guess, for you, obsession. I think that yes, you are in a positive way
It's a good word.
obsessed.
It's got negative connotations. People think it's a bad thing.
For
And
me, it's
it's
a
like,
great thing.
I
It's a
would
very
rather be around
positive.
people that are obsessed. Yeah, the top few percent that want to be 1% better. That's
Yeah.
much better space than being down here in the middle when it's all beige and vanilla.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So if you think about this obsession with storytelling, and that's what we will be talking about today, we're going to look at some principles of better stories, how to tell better stories. For someone who's just clicked on this podcast, what would you tell them for them to stay around and listen? Why should they do that? What will they get from this conversation, from your
Oh,
perspective?
wow. Are you asking me for our elevator pitch for the next 50 minutes of our conversation? Put me on the spot. The thing I'm boiling it down to, look, I've been around a little bit. I've been around a lot of tech companies. I'm very lucky to be global communications designer of one of the biggest tech companies in the world, and especially with what's going on in generative AI, it's changing everything. But the bit I would be interested in, if I was listening to me, hopefully, over the last 5 or 6 years, I've analyzed about 57,000 stories, speeches, scripts, podcasts, business decks, presentations, winning and loss. Why did they work? Why didn't they? What happens if you want to get promoted? What happens if you want to go and try and pitch to a small team? What happens if you're on a stage in front of thousands and you want to influence them to change? You want to make more money? You want to be over here fighting for the cause that you're passionate about? You know, all of those are places where I've tried to hone my craft, and I've worked with some of the best folks in the world, and I've certainly worked with some average folks that are just, so I've seen a lot of good stuff and bad stuff. And I'd like to think that Better Stories, the site that I just threw out there for a little bit of fun and made it all free, it's kind of my attempt for anybody at any level to say, actually, look, this sounds incredibly complicated. And often it's dismissed as a soft skill, which annoys me no end, because it's not. It's only easy when you don't know how to do it. You see how storytelling really happens at the best of the best, the highest. It's really flipping hard, super, super difficult. So I like to try and deconstruct that and say it's really simple. It comes down to 9 principles. Anybody can learn them. You guys can leave this session in 50 minutes with hopefully some tools that are going to help you do your job better tomorrow, this afternoon.
Perfect. Perfect. Let's try and do that. Let's try and deconstruct at least some of these principles. Now, for example, the first principle is that better stories are transformational. Now, for example, you mentioned that in 2022, I think a couple of years ago, you spent a week in Boston studying JFK's speeches. Can you, for those one, and I guess most people will not be familiar with this, can you tell us a little bit about his process, 4 words and 5 lines?
Well, there's a couple of things there combined with the JFK view and the transformational view. Let's just pick apart the first bit, just kind of storytelling 101. Stories are really just there. I mean, you know this better than I do, right? Stories are there to make an audience feel something. It's a transfer of emotion. And you've got left brain storytellers and right brain storytellers, but generally it's there to entertain. It's there to help an audience feel something. Now we're in the business world, so we need a bit more than that, because we can't just tell entertaining stories, because we're not, Netflix and TED and lots of other. You've got to tell stories that make someone feel something so that they do something. Okay, so when I look at a lot of business stories, they're not stories. They're often cold stories. And some of them might say, client success story. And here's a bunch of the things that we did for this client. And then here's some outcomes and a nice quote from, somebody famous and some of the offerings that we sold. And here's what happened in the end. Awesome. That's not a story. It's a list of stuff that happened. It's not bad, but it's just a list of stuff that happens. For a story to be a story, somebody has to be transformed by the end of it. If they're not transformed, for better or worse, it's not a story, right? I mean, this goes back, as you know, thousands of years to Aristotle. And we could talk about Joseph Campbell's hero's journey and Blake Schneider's Save the Cat, and there's thousands and thousands of different versions. So somebody's going to want something really bad, huge obstacles standing in their way. The bigger the obstacle and the more they want it, obviously, the better the delta, the stronger the story. Tons of dopamine and oxytocin. They meet a guide who knows the way out, calls them to action. gives them a plan, right? Happily ever after. Hopefully our hero, whoever that is, the client, our customer, us, right? We're transformed for the better by the end of it. Now, tons and tons have been written on that. And you've done loads of interviews with people who've just waxed lyrical about that really, really, really well. What I wanted to do was to try and get to the root of not just the philosophy, but structurally, how can I help someone to tell a story really, really fast when it's at the highest level and everything's on the line? Because that's really where I live most of my life. I like to call it mission critical storytelling. It doesn't really exist as a phrase outside of IBM, but mission critical storytelling has a lot of similarities with maybe another view would be tactical communications in the military. You've got mission critical environments when stuff has to happen. And how can you translate that so that everybody becomes on board? They've got a mission, they know where they're going to get to, they're going to be transformed for the mission objectives by the end of it. So I've just been looking around for years to like, who's the best of the best at doing amazing storytelling? And just like anybody else, you go through thousands of TED Talks, you look at all the famous speeches, you read every single book. I don't know if my camera's going to work here, but if this is a curriculum of a lot of the stuff that I teach. Most of those are just storytelling books, right? Just read tons and tons and tons of stuff. Then came across JFK. Now, my job is modeled on his speechwriter's job description, a guy called Ted Sorensen. I'll give you the short version, and then if you want me to unpack it, we can do that. And what I discovered was that Ted Sorensen, who wrote all these amazing speeches with JFK, like the Ask Not inauguration, the Moon speech, I think is the best technically perfect speech that's ever been given. Best technology. So many similarities to business. Better than anything Steve Jobs ever said, in my opinion. We meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. And you think, wow, that's a line. Like that could have been written last week. And it was written for this speech on the 12th of September, 1962. So obsession, I started to obsess over everything that JFK had done, had said. If anybody wants to freeze frame, you'll see it's all JFK books. And I discovered this really simple idea. Somebody asked Ted, how'd you write these amazing speeches to get so much stuff done very, very quickly? Whether that's putting man on the moon, Cuban Missile Crisis. He said, it's dead easy. It's just 4 words and 5 lines. That's all it comes down to. So for the thousands of hours of academic work I've done on philosophy and storytelling and hero's journeys, here's this speechwriter from the 1960s saying, actually, it's dead easy. You just need 4 words and 5 lines. You need an outline, a headline, a front line, a sideline, and a bottom line. The outline is what we just discussed, the transformation journey that would frame our story within. So that's an outline, millions of different versions of outlines. Donald Miller, right? Loads of people have written great stuff. But then you need a headline that they're going to remember tomorrow, and it's only going to be one thing, probably 15 words less. Front line, what's the cold open? What are you going to say in the first 90 seconds? What's the bottom line? What do you want them to do? What's the sideline? How can we personalize it with favorite quotes from Taylor Swift or whoever, right? And then you've just got to make sure, brevity, levity, clarity, and charity. Brevity, make it short. Levity, bring light, especially if it's a deep, dark, difficult subject. Clarity, simplify complexity. We might talk about that in a bit. And charity, got to have a purpose. Because what you stand for is far more important than what you sell. As Simon Sinek used to say, the goal in business isn't to sell to people who need what you have, it's to work with people who believe what you believe. So that's it. 4 words, 5 lines, influence an audience, take them on a transformational journey, make them feel something so they do something.
We're going to explore some of these ideas in a little bit more detail. One thing in particular, just for now, I think it's called headline. And you said, so it should be just a brief sentence. And so you say that people will often describe your speech, your story, your presentation in 1 sentence. Tell me more about these, the power of that 1 sentence.
There's tons of books. There's a brilliant book called The One Thing by Gary Keller with Jay Papasan. The One Thing, an amazing yellow cover, big black text in the front. One thing, why is it so important to focus on one thing? JFK, why was it so important to focus on putting man on the moon within a decade? You've got NASA with 400,000 employees and contractors. NASA had millions of objectives, not millions. There was like 7. But it was education, and it was science, and it was, putting man on the moon was only one of the smaller things of the things they wanted to do. One of JFK's skills was boiling it down to one thing. That is the only thing you will ever talk about publicly. We are going to put man on the moon within a decade. So the line, we choose to go to the moon and we're going to do it within this decade, became the headline of that speech. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, we could talk all day long about how he improv those lines, but that became the headline when somebody was like, doctor, tell him about the dream that you had. That became, Barack Obama was amazing at that. What they're doing is they're using a political device that's sometimes called 10 words. And 10 words doesn't mean exactly 10 words. I recorded about 30 episodes of a podcast about it a few years ago. But 10-word statements is basically the headline of what the journalists may print tomorrow. But really, it's what's the one thing that they're going to describe about your talk? Maybe someone looks at what we're chatting about now and they're like, oh, he's the guy from IBM that helps people tell better stories. I don't know, but there's going to be a line. Another way of looking at it might be Seth Godin, right? Seth really well. Seth Godin says, if you can't describe what you're doing in 8 words or less, you don't know what you're doing. Like, okay, that's a good one. Steve Jobs says, if you can't explain what you're doing simply, you don't need PowerPoint if you know what you're talking about. You're going to be looking at these. And Nancy Duarte, another amazing storyteller, probably, I think, the best commercial storyteller that's out there with her organization. She has something called the STAR moment that she teaches. STAR, something they'll always remember. McKinsey have a pyramid principle that has a big thing at the top. If you look at all of these different frameworks and the great speeches to try and understand why did they work, a lot of it is because they remembered it and they had this North Star that the whole thing rallied around. And it wasn't 2, it wasn't 3, it wasn't 5 or 7, it was one thing. And a lot of speeches don't do that these days. And a lot of business presentations just aim at too many things, which is why we forget about 72% of what we hear. So that's what I encourage folks to do. So I steal from Ted Sorensen and say, right, what's your headline going to be? Let's go for that first. And then let's see if we can reverse engineer the story leading up to the headline. Because we're not in Hollywood. It's not like I'm going to tease you with the thing to the end and we've got the denouement where we're all transformed by the end of it. I need to get shit done. So what's the one thing that we're going to do? How are we going to do it? Right, now give me the plan. It's just a very strategic way of storytelling, which is, again, back to the military stuff. It's why I like mission critical storytelling. It's why I like tactical communications. Move fast, get things done, put a value on it, get everybody else on board at the same time.
And the nice things about these things is that it's not just for like big politicians, JFK, or people like Martin Luther King. These principles can and are applied every day in business as well. Another principle in your list of 9 principles is that better stories tell the truth. Now, you say that great storytellers have a responsibility to tell the truth and tell the audience when they don't. So can we explore this principle in a little bit more detail, the importance of telling the truth when it comes to storytelling?
Are we going to go all Joe Rogan on everybody and turn this into a 4-hour episode?
It's going to be up to an hour, more or less.
Maybe we need a follow-up to bring this in, because that unpacks a whole hornet's nest of stuff. But you're right. It's, I mean, again, looking back at the world of business and politics, you've generally got filters between a great story and a really good message. And I've heard it from various people. I've heard it famously from David Axelrod, who was chief strategist campaign manager for Barack Obama during his campaigns. And what they always used to do when they were looking at stories, there was a filter. What does he say? What doesn't he say? Great storytelling is all about what you leave out, isn't it? Great editing. So they had these 3 filters. Is it important? Is it relevant? Is it true? So which is a great gauge to, I'm more proud of the things I didn't say than I am of what I did. It's like I want to leave out the stuff that's not connected, even if I might be passionate about it. My audience might not be as passionate about it as I am. Is it important? Is it relevant? Is it true? So is it important? You know, we can have an idea if we've done our homework and we've done enough research into our audience, we know if it's important to them or not, you know, because it's not about what we want to say, it's about what they need to hear. Is it relevant? Well, okay, has it been said before? Have other people said it in the same way? I gave a keynote 2 weeks ago, first keynote I've given in years, and I looked through the agenda. I was the last one of the day, and there was like another 15 people that were saying almost the same thing. And it was like, well, maybe I can say it in a different way, and it's kind of relevant, but it's already been done. I ended up changing my entire presentation 40 minutes before I went on stage. But then it begs the question, okay, you've got my attention. This is something that's relevant to this audience. Is it true? So, okay, I'm throwing lots of my favorite people at you. Yo-Yo Ma, the great cellist, he has an idea that when he's going on to give a performance on stage, and he talks like he's telling a story without words, he's playing his cello, he's thinking, I want to seek truth, I want to build trust, and I want to perform a service. Like, what a gorgeous idea for any presenter, right? Any communicator. I want to seek truth, I want to build trust with the audience, I want to perform a service with what it is I'm going to be giving them. So again, I started obsessing over truth in lots of different guises and reading like The Trusted Advisor, which is a big book in the consultancy world, looking at how we build trusted relationships. Trust comes from oxytocin. How do we build oxytocin with a story, especially with an audience that might hate you? That's a whole thing in itself. And then I came across Neil deGrasse Tyson, the science communicator. And this was the final piece, which is why it became one of my 9 principles, because I've got all of these moving parts and like, it's got to be about telling the truth. But some of the stories, it's like, you know, really on the political campaign, you know, Biden and Trump, who's telling the truth? Both of them, none of them. It's like, it's all subjective, right? And what I loved that Neil deGrasse Tyson said in one of his online masterclasses, he said there's 3 types of truth. You've got personal truth, you've got political truth, and then you've got scientific truth. You've got the objective truth. Now it's come to life, because my personal truth might be something about my faith, you know, for argument's sake. And I may believe that or not. I don't care if you do or not, it doesn't matter. It's not going to change. I believe that to be true. My daughter absolutely believes unicorns are real. 100%, no question. My other one believes dragons are real. Can't talk them out of it. Personal truth. Political truth, lots of people believe it to be true. And the power of many, you know, movements, they all believe that what they're doing is true. They vote in blue or red, right? Not necessarily true, but it's pure. Objective truth, just science. Earth is round. Can't argue with it. Whether you agree with it or not doesn't matter. It is true. It is scientifically proven to be true. So again, back to writing stories, and I'm saying it needs to tell the truth. What kind of a truth is it saying? Are we talking about influence and inspiring around a movement? Are we talking about trying to, in the world of climate change, when I spend a lot of time, especially with climate deniers, and you're trying to argue over the science, and you can do that all day long and people don't care. You've got to speak to their gut, not their ears, you know. So personal, political, scientific. If anyone gets a chance, check out Neil deGrasse Tyson on masterclass.com. Or if you've got a friend, get them to give you a free gift pass. Any member can give out free unlimited gift passes, and you'll get his lesson to do for free. It's well worth a few hours.
Neil deGrasse Tyson. So because you mention him, it's one of my dreams to one day.
You got to get him on here.
Exactly. I often think about, because I'm super passionate, obsessed with communication, and I'm also very passionate about science. And so Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of the best, if not the best, science communicator.
He's amazing. Brian Cox in the UK is phenomenal. Hannah Fry is the mathematician. I love what she does as well. I mean, they're all really standing on the shoulders of giants. They're going to look at Carl Sagan, you know, and look at great communicators like that. But that's the stuff I think we don't do enough of in business. We're not pulling from these other sources. You know, I mean, you might look at something from the 60s. Walt Disney would be another great example. Why did he write the stories in the way that he did? I go to such a level of obsession with some of this stuff. If I'm writing a creative story and I want to be inspired by the way that Walt Disney might have created the Imagineering team, right? The imagination, the creative, and the engineers. I even write in the same color fountain pen ink that Walt Disney writes in. I found out, and it took me ages, I found out the exact color of tobacco brown that he wrote in, and I've got a bottle of that. Neil deGrasse Tyson had talked to you all day long about inks and fountain pens. But now when I'm telling a story, now it feels different. And also I don't do it digitally, I write it longhand because it feels like something magical's happening. Now I can afford to do that, a lot of it because of AI, because AI can save me so much time. I can creatively afford to do some things manually. But when I do everything digitally, for me, it just gets a little bit too sanitized sometimes, and it takes the heart and soul out of it.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about AI because I follow you on LinkedIn, and I can see that you are very much into the power of AI now in relation to storytelling. And yes, maybe one day we'll have Neil deGrasse Tyson or Brian Cox on the show.
Oh, that'd be
Let's
amazing. Do it.
look at another super important principle. You started talking about these at the very beginning, where you said that better stories are transformational. This is in a way connected.
Mhm.
Another principle is that better stories have measurable outcomes. That's also the transformation side of things. So how do we go about measuring the impact of a story? What advice would you give to someone? It could be a business owner, a business leader who needs to or wants to justify or measure the impact, the business impact, the commercial impact of a story, of storytelling in general within their organization.
That's a great question. And this is also one of those that we could spend hours on. This is a workshop within its own right, especially if we get a lot of marketers in the room. I spent a lot of my career in the marketing world, and I've been quite mean to it in some regards, not intentionally, but just because a lot of the metrics that are measured traditionally, the way that you would report on some marketing campaigns, they might be true. You say, is it important, relevant? It's true. The thing that I always was concerned about was that a lot of the metrics that I was presenting, whilst within the circle that was measuring those stories, which could be marketing, comms, PR, whoever, they weren't being taken seriously by anybody further up the food chain. And then you start noticing, well, why are there not enough CMOs, the people that run this whole division? Why are they not on the board? Why have they not got the senior positions in some of these big companies? And then you very quickly discover lack of credibility, lack of respect. They don't actually trust those metrics. Preference, consideration, awareness, eyeballs, click through, even NPS we can massage, in ways that can give us a score that we might want. So those are all examples of measurable outcomes. For some people, and I have no agenda when I say this, by the way. I did a post a couple of days ago. When is it? Monday. I think I did it on Friday about Jerry Seinfeld on LinkedIn.
I saw it. I saw the talk. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the best commencement speeches I've heard in forever. It's phenomenal. There's a big backstory I chose not to dig in, which is why I had to very carefully moderate my LinkedIn for the last few days, which has been challenging in itself. But that post has had about 1 million views. It's probably got, I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000 likes, and there's amazing conversation underneath, like 500 comments. It's a great conversation itself. For me, that's why I love using LinkedIn, because if I was running an online conference, that's what I would want. I want a lot of attention. I want some people to like it and some people to hate it. I want it to spark really feisty discussion, and I want it to be constructive and safe and healthy, and and people that sharing in a safe space, all that, which is what that post was. For many people, that would be an amazing measurable outcome. And there's nothing wrong with that. If we were to look at influence or eminence, whatever you want to call it, LinkedIn calls it a top voice. Some people call it thought leadership. But I would say, in kind of my own defense, there is an element of, great, Jeremy, good for you. So what? 1 million people saw your post. Who gives a shit? What's the purpose of a story that we said at the beginning? To share a piece of content, a transformational journey of someone that makes them feel something so that they do something. Any of the speechwriters that I work with, certainly any of the people that I write for, and there's been some reasonably high profile execs and politicians in that list, they would say the outcome of a good speech is what did the audience do afterwards, which is directly linked to, what's the call to action? What did you ask them to do? Is it, if I'm giving a climate change speech, do I want your vote? Do I want your voice? Do I want you to change your choices of where you spend your money, or, you know, how you live your life or whatever? Those would be measurable outcomes for that speech. Now, how we measure that becomes the next challenge, which we probably haven't got time for. But what I've done is make sure that whatever audience I'm speaking to, the measurable outcome is directly defined in a way that, with a certain degree of confidence, it's certainly not flawless. Sometimes the best we can do is 50-50. What did they do? Did this increase the win rate? Did this increase pipeline? Have you got more confidence? Can you now tell a story better than you could before? What's your confidence level gone up before and after? We'll do surveys before, just like you would in coaching. You know, did you go and buy the thing? Did you sign the deal? What? And that's the challenge, that we don't put enough measurable outcomes on it. There's another brilliant book, and it's called Numbers. I'm going to get the name slightly wrong, but it's called Numbers and Narratives. Can't see the spine of it on my wall, but if you search Numbers and Narratives, you'll see it. It's green and with an orange spine. That does a great job of putting an economic value on a story. And that's what I used to do at Salesforce, what I did at Adobe, and what I tried to do a lot at Facebook. Now, here's the interesting caveat to all of this, which throws it all up in the air. Just because you can measure something doesn't mean that you should, right? You know, some stories shouldn't be measured. Sometimes there are cases when it shouldn't have a specific measurable outcome. And there's even companies, one of them's called Syncaps, if anybody wants to do the research going back in the day, SYNCAPSE. That was a Canadian software company that tried, failed, reformed, failed again, huge bankruptcy. All they were trying to do was to put a value on a Facebook audience. And they realized very quickly it didn't work. And just because you like a brand doesn't mean you're going to spend another $139 a year on Big Macs, you know. And they came very quickly to the methodology that they tried to put in. They were doing the right thing, but for the wrong reasons. Didn't work. So I do think they need a measurable outcome. It's going to be in what did they do. It's up to you to define what that action is going to be, but make sure that you have one. It's not going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 things. You're going to get them to do one thing. It's going to be connected to your headline, and it should be wrapped in a huge amount of urgency so that they act fast.
Before we continue with this episode, I just want to share a few resources that I think will be super useful for you. The first one is check out either my book, Confident Presenter, or my colleague Phil Wakenall's book, Business Presentation Revolution, or both. These are books for business owners and leaders who want to take their presentation skills to a higher level. To make the most of the books, take the Confident Presenter Scorecard, which is an online tool that allows you to assess your presentation skills for free in less than 3 minutes. And then also, at the moment, I'm running a series of free presentation skills web classes, and I'd love to see you there. The links are in the show notes. Now, let's go back to the episode. Why do you think, Jeremy, that Bloomberg, I saw you on your website, are one of the best, if not the best, at telling business stories?
Bloomberg. Oh, that's actually, that's a perfect segue. That wasn't set up at all. But you just, the bit that I didn't say with the urgency. So Bloomberg is incredible. Bloomberg Technologies, if you work in the tech industry, they do a daily show. It's one of the best things out there. But the founder, a guy called Michael Bloomberg, again, brilliant advocate for climate justice, been a great mayor, done amazing work in the business world. He has a word that he's obsessed by. And he wrote a book called Hope. The Climate of Hope with Carl Pope. That was it. Climate of Hope. And somewhere in like the first handful of pages, he talks about this fancy Greek word called kairos. And I'd heard it in different spaces because kairos translates roughly as time in Greek. But there's lots of things, lots of different meanings of time. It looks like the opportune moment. You know, did I say the right thing at the right moment? But the way that Mike Bloomberg describes it, and this is rooted in the DNA of the way that Bloomberg tell their business stories, and they have to move fast because they're Bloomberg, because the world's changing so quick. Everyone's competing against speed. Mike Bloomberg says kairos is the most important thing you need as a storyteller. Why? Because kairos translates as a supreme moment at which one simply must act, no matter how implausible or inconvenient. Like, what a beautiful line. It's as a storyteller. Supreme moment, the audience must act no matter how inconvenient, you know. And he does a lot of work with Al Gore, inconvenient truth. There's some clever word use of language there as well with Al Gore's work. But you want people to act quickly. Kairos. So homework for anybody that needs it. Search Kairos on Wikipedia. Let that take you down a foxhole. Start to become a student of rhetoric. And then you'll get into ethos, pathos, and logos once you start getting into Aristotle's world. But those are the key foundational ingredients of a brilliant story. You know, pathos, emotion, logos, you know, it's got to be about the data, ethos, the credibility and trust, the truth of the speaker, and then kairos, the sense of urgency to get stuff done. Pathos, ethos, logos, kairos. 4 fancy words, but again, it's a very simple little framework for telling a great story.
Because you mentioned Al Gore, and that's also, there's another principle as part of the 9 principles, which is very much connected to having a measurable outcome, which is that better stories inspire action. Now, you say, I know that you watched a few years ago a presentation, a talk by Al Gore, and if I remember well, I saw you online somewhere that you said that you think that that is the best presentation, or one of the best presentations you've seen. And you also mentioned climate. Of course, we know the inconvenient truth. I know that you are very close to climate protection. We can talk about that purpose as well. Tell me more about why you think that that particular presentation by Al Gore was so good, so effective.
Have you seen any of his stuff, by the way? Have you ever seen him just give a straight keynote?
I've seen The Inconvenient Truth.
Because I mean, and that movie is really wrapped around one of his speeches. And then you've got Truth to Power, and like he did a great one just before COP28 around TED's summit, which was a little bit provocative and controversial because of the nature of the COP, the climate summit that was being held in Saudi. But brilliant speaker, just phenomenal. On the board of Apple, heavily inspired by Steve Jobs. I would hazard a guess, I've got no insider knowledge, but I wouldn't be surprised that Steve Jobs likewise was heavily inspired by Al Gore, and they helped each other out a lot. And, you know, he continues to do a bunch of stuff with Apple. He's just, for whatever your politics are, he is just a brilliant communicator, and he's just been very passionate about his one thing, which has been, you know, the climate crisis. But he has to find different ways to tell that story to different audiences. Like Jane Goodall would be another amazing example of someone that's done the same thing. You know, presenters like this joke that they've got one sermon, and they just, throughout the year, they've got to find 52 different ways to tell that sermon, you know. And I really like that line a lot. It's like, you have your one speech. And Al Gore's the same. Now, there's 2 sides to his speech. I've seen him do many times the 10-minute version, which I've coached a lot of people to give themselves. You can Google it. My name might even come up if you dig around. It's called The Truth in 10. And The Truth in 10 is a 10-minute presentation about climate change. Exactly 10 minutes. But it's got about 55 slides. So there's part of the clue to be a confident presenter. Really, Jeremy? I did your test this morning, by the way, on your website. And I'm 85%. I've got some work to do. I think we could argue about some of the questions are very binary, and a lot of those answers depend. But you say for someone like Al Gore, it's like, okay, is 55 slides a good idea for a 10-minute presentation? In 99 times out of 100, you and I would both say no, probably. Hopefully we'd say it depends first, and then we'd end up saying no, but doesn't sound like a good idea. When I saw him do his full presentation, which was about 3.5 hours long, I'm looking on the agenda and I'm like, okay, well, we're going to have a coffee break there. That's probably going to be lunch. That's going to be maybe another little break for some donuts or some fresh air. No, we went all the way through one PowerPoint presentation, 600 plus slides over 3 hours. Now, both of them for different reasons, for different purposes, did the same thing, which is why I think he's so good. Because the big presentation had about, I want to say 647 slides, but it was a lot, 3.5 hours. But the 10-minute version and the 3-hour version both did the same thing. They had a rhythm and a cadence, and they were all transformational. So the 10-minute version might be, must we change, can we change, will we change? It's a very simple TED style 3-act structure. Must we change? You know, there's no problems. Can we change? Do we have the potential to change in the tools and the technologies? And then, you know, must we change, can we change, will we change? Have we got the chops to do it? And a sense of urgency, right? Back to Kairos. Whenever you're listening to him present, and do it, if you go and have a look at one of his presentations, and what you'll see, I'll simplify it down a lot in the next 20 seconds, but he might spend 30 seconds on a slide, and then 20 seconds, and then 10, and then 5, and then one, black screen, dramatic pause. And he gets louder, and then he gets quieter, and then he'll speed up, and then he'll slow down. And there's a musicality to the way he presents. Aaron Sorkin, who's a brilliant screenwriter, says the same thing. There's a musicality to dialogue. It's why I write a lot of my speeches on music paper, because it reminds me there's a musicality to what Jerry Seinfeld, he wrote it as a psalm, as a poem, like Winston Churchill used to. It's like song lyric style. So it's a speech, but it's not written in the style of a speech, it's written in the style of a song. When you do that, 55 slides in 10 minutes sounds like the best thing you've ever heard in your life. 600 slides in 3 hours feels like 20 minutes. And it's amazing how you can have the audience sat on the edge of their seat for something that looks like it shouldn't work. Over 3 hours of speaking with hundreds of slides in a very hot conference room. That shouldn't work. And it does. But it just shows the power of storytelling and understanding your audience, and why structure and rhythm and cadence and a lot of practice and very cleverly designed slides, obsessing over the number of words and objects on each slide, all the stuff that's in your book. That's why this stuff matters. It's why J.P. Phillips has got a job in Sweden. He talks about this all day long, you know, David J.P. Phillips. So I just thought it was phenomenal. And I've loved him speaking ever since. If I can come even halfway close to holding an audience's attention like that, I'll be happy.
Talking about number of slides, and yes, so the answer is it depends. It very much depends. I've seen, Jeremy, fantastic presentations and very bad presentations. In both cases, sometimes they had so many slides. In other cases, they had no slide at all. So it very much depends.
What's the best ones? Let me just, sorry to interrupt, hold that question. What's the best presentation you've ever seen? Is there anything that stands out?
I like the one that stands out is probably We Need to Talk About an Injustice by Brian
Stevenson.
And,
awesome.
and no, there are no slides at all there. And most of the talk is him telling a story, talking about the power of storytelling.
3-act structure, 3 5-minute stories, gets the job done. Yeah, that's a great one.
Very, very powerful. And yeah, so no, I just wanted to mention there's another speaker, another presenter, is also a professor. You may know Gar Reynolds in your line of work, the author of Presentation Zen is a friend. So I became very passionate about presenting, public speaking, because when I was at university, I found his book Presentation Zen, and in a way it changed my life. He's one of those, I'm not like that, but he's one of those presenters who use lots of slides.
Yeah,
but he does it very well. For him, it works in his content. The way
Seth Godin's another good one. He has hundreds. He presents.
Yeah. I tend to be, I wouldn't say the opposite, but I just like to have maybe just very few slides, just to really reinforce some of my key messages. But there is no right or wrong approach. It very much depends on what works for you. Even more importantly, what works for the audience. And let's also talk about another principle, which is better stories use strong verbs and short sentences. Now, even on LinkedIn, when I follow you, often talk about, and I think you've done it as well on Friday with Shamefield's talk at Duke. You talk about readability scores. For those who are not familiar with this, can you tell us more?
Readability scores are just a really good way of trying to understand how is your story, speech, script, pitch, interview, whatever the thing is, How's it likely to resonate with the audience? And again, this is where the caveat is, which is the best readability score. It doesn't matter, it depends. Depends who the audience is. But there are some ideals that you should aim towards. Like when you're coaching for the TED stage, TED Global, there's a very specific way. It's almost a little bit too formulaic, if I could say that, because a lot of them, you can tell from a million miles off before you see the red spot. You just know what it is, because the structure, the sentence structure, the rhythm, the flow, there's a template that works for them, right? But they focus a lot on readability scores as well, which is why if you run them through computers to do this, TED scores are really, really low. What it basically means is measuring, say, grade school, and anyone can Google. The easiest one to start with is, it's not the most accurate, but it's the easiest. Gunning Fog, Gunning, Gunning Fog, F-O-G. Just search Gunning Fog Index. And what that's going to do is it's going to have a little tiny, if you Google it, you'll see the Wikipedia. It'll show you a very, very simple algorithm. It's a very simple equation. And it's basically looking at the content of the speech that you have. And it's looking at how many words is it, how many words per sentence, how many 3-syllable words, and how much punctuation. And based upon that, it just gives you a score. And that score is supposed to determine what level of education would you need to try and understand this presentation, right? So if you were doing, say, if you were a college student, which might be about A levels in the UK, you might be college students in the US, you might have a score that is going to be somewhere 12 or above, right? Generally what happens that I found with measuring thousands and thousands of speeches is that there's a thing in common that a lot of the best C-suite presentations have, especially when you've got a big story to tell to a very important audience. And the caveat could be they've not heard this story before, but you need them to act. And you might not have many opportunities to present it in different ways. So we might flippantly say, don't use too many buzzwords. But what we're really saying is you need a lower readability score. So a great way, which is why you should write every script longhand. I don't care what anybody says. I'll die on that hill. Learn it and rehearse it and practice it to death afterwards, but write it longhand so you can measure it. So the best business presentations are going to score less than a 12, ideally less than a 10. And the Jerry Seinfeld commencement speech, which to be fair is a commencement by a comedian, which is going to be a very specific style of presenting in itself, but very short sentence structure. You know, there's going to be a lot of active words in that. And he's going to score, I think it was like a 6.7 or something. It was insanely low. But what it means is that anybody, like my twins who are 7, they could understand that presentation. If I start making some of those sentences longer, which gives me less pauses, and I've got some more 3-syllable words, in theory, I might need to be age 10, 11, 12 before I understand it. So go and Google it and check it out. But it is that you can use the Hemingway app. You can go in editors function in Microsoft Word. I use artificial intelligence to try and do a lot of the calculations faster. There's loads. Flesh Kincaid's a really strong one. Go and have a look at the reading scores. But the thing that you need to be aware of is understand your audience, because sometimes you need a technical presentation with a lot of 3-syllable words, and you can't apologize for it being smart. Make it simple, but don't dilute it, right? And also be aware that a 3-syllable word like interesting is a really good word, but it scores really badly on a readability score because it's 3 syllables. So back to the rhythm. 1 syllable, 2 syllable, 3-syllable words, mix it up. You'll see the analysis on my Jerry Seinfeld one. Average word length was like 1.4 syllables or something. Average sentence length is this. It's a good way of guessing in advance whether or not your speech is going to be able to work. And you can do a lot of the heavy lifting in advance. Instead of doing a post-mortem afterwards, why didn't that work? I can go and prepare in advance of why this is likely to land with this audience. And if we really got in the weeds, which maybe we won't have time for, I'd want to be talking about the personality type of the presenter, the personality type and the archetype, the mindset, the DNA of the company. I might be feeding intelligence from all of those different audiences to try and understand, is this language with those emotional triggers going to get the outcome I need?
And I
That's the
know that
stuff
you
that
are
now AI is going to help you with.
exactly. So I can see that you are doing these tests and this kind of analysis using artificial intelligence. And just one comment there before we continue, because some people may think, oh, but my subject is really complex, it's technical. So this is not about dumbing things down, it's not about oversimplifying things. Your subject may be complex, it may be technical, but the way you present it, the way you communicate it shouldn't be. Of course, it very much depends on the audience. Again, for example, if I think about your work and where you do it, Jeremy, at IBM, I can only assume that there are many teams who need to communicate topics, ideas which are very complex, very technical. And I guess sometimes they need to be, or maybe often, they need to be communicated in an engaging way, in a simple way for people to understand, for non-technical people, for them to be able to understand it. How do they go about doing that? If there is anything else in addition to, for example, using simple language?
I mean, simple language is still going to come into play, which is back to the 4 words and 5 lines, clarity and brevity. I mean, a good example, we've got, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, I think he's one of the best presenters that we have in our business, is a guy called Dario Gil, Gil. He leads our research division, and we have a lot of quantum work that comes out of that. It's given birth to a lot of our AI models. And Dario Gil's a phenomenal presenter. And if you look on Better Stories, there's a tab called One Pages, and I think you'll be able to scroll down and see it. I'm sure I've done a couple of examples on Dario where I've deconstructed his quantum speech. So just find the quantum bit, but maybe put it in the notes. But that might be, okay, how do I talk about quantum computing where half of the audience might be technical developers and maybe even quantum scientists? There'll be some physicists in the room as well. Highly technical, very, subject matter expertise. They know, because it's a quantum summit, that's their community. There's also a huge amount of business people that really don't know anything yet. They just know this is likely to change a lot of things, possibly within 5 years. We don't know how and we don't know when. So he's got to speak to those people as well. So what I noticed is that when I started taking Dario's presentations to bits and seeing how we present for audiences like that, readability is still a big deal. Take a gunning fog, he will still score, between 10 and 12 for the most technical quantum presentation. Now that might be a 15-minute, like Brian Stevenson, 5, 5, 5. 5 minutes, this is exciting because 5 minutes, but the world is going into a mess, disturb, here's all the challenges. 5 minutes, assure, this is how this new technology is going to help transform the world for the better. So a very simple 3-act structure. And I think whether you've got readability scores or you've got a flow or whatever your favorite outline is, as long as it is pieced together with a through line, as Ted or Nancy Duarte might say, the audience can come along with you. If you don't have that, which is what many business presenters don't, especially, say, take a company like mine, when you've got tens, sometimes hundreds of people feeding into a speech. And there's a lot of opinions, that's a lot of egos, that's a lot of smart folks. What do you leave in? What do you take out? It's really, really hard. And the danger is that you end up trying to please everybody and you just have this patchwork quilt and you're not aiming at anything. I've got like 7 things and it's not quite a narrative and the slides don't match and it's all over the place. As long as you can have that flow. And that's what I'm spending most of my time at the moment, is building AI models that you could put in hundreds of presentations, pieces of advice, audience demographics, stories that work, ones that didn't. And the AI can help you. This is the future, I think, of storytelling. We're going to have more time to obsess over our audience, and we're going to have more time to become curators of stories. And in the business world, don't get me wrong, not in entertainment world, and less time creating, where we might be spending tens of hours a week researching, manual labor, trying to find the hardcore data. We don't need to do that anymore. AI can do that for us. I spend all my time on the audience. So we're moving from creation to curation. And given that AI can save you so much time, the smart storyteller is going to take that time and invest it in finding a better connection with their audience, rehearsing, practicing more emotional stories, insights into what makes them tick, all the stuff that
let's look at one other principle before we wrap up, Jeremy, which is that better stories are surprising. Now, I know that you think that surprise is perhaps one of the most important elements in business storytelling. Why is that? Let's talk about the power of surprise in storytelling.
Well, there's a lot of resources and books on better stories that if you go and have a look at, it's I want to say it's 7. I think it's page 7, the 7th principle. Surprise changes everything. If we were to Google emotions right now, and we were to go and Google image search and like how many emotions are there, we would see color wheels, we'd see periodic tables, we'd see thousands of them, and it's going to get increasingly more complex. There'll be this assault on your senses of different rainbow colors for the different emotions. But there's only 8 core emotions, 8 core emotion drivers. This is based upon work on emotional intelligence that was made famous by Daniel Goleman in the late 90s, the great psychologist, right, that wrote this amazing best-selling book, arguably coined the phrase emotional intelligence, but really someone else did it. But that was his book. And part of the premise of his book was there's only 8 core emotions. We've got negative emotions and we've got positive emotions. So there's actually 5 negative emotions. We have fear, anger, disgust, shame, and sadness, which if we actually dig into some of the research from MIT today, they might have us believe that 80% of our thoughts in business are naturally negative. That's a challenge in itself. A lot of at the moment, we're overwhelmed. People are scared of losing their jobs. You're scared that technology is changing too quick. Tons of data to back up why people believe that to be true. But negative mindset. Okay, so what's the purpose of a story? Is to transform someone. Is to make them feel something so they do something. So we've got to become students of emotions to understand how they feel what they do. And if they've got a negative mindset, our job is to turn it into a positive mindset, right? Oh, shoot, how do we do that? Okay, well, we could talk about influence and clever language and storytelling and human emotions and don't use stats and stuff. But really what you're boiling down to is I want you to experience heightened levels of oxytocin to flood the right-hand side of your brain. Your limbic system from your amygdala, heightened levels of oxytocin, which builds trust. It's the trust hormone, generosity, trust, and bonding. Okay, how do we do that? Well, the 2 emotions that are positive, according to Daniel Goleman, is love and trust, he bundles together, and joy and excitement, he bundles together. Okay, that's great, Jeremy, but that's 7. So we've got 5 negative and 2 positive, and I need you to go from here to here. How do I do that? What Daniel says, and I'm massively oversimplifying his work, so I'm really sorry, but surprise is the only emotion biologically capable of changing your state, your biological and physical state due to the chemical makeup in your brain of your hormones from negative to positive. Surprise. Doesn't even sound like an emotion, but surprise can change your state. And a really flippant way of looking at it might be if your partner gave you flowers on Valentine's Day, you'd probably go, oh, that's amazing, thanks. Kind of expected it, but thanks means a lot, right? You'd be pissed if they didn't, but you know. But if they give you flowers or a really nice gift somewhere else when you don't expect it, it becomes like 100 times more important. And it's that kind of spontaneous act of giving. They've surprised you. Now you think to any story, you're surprised when something happened to the protagonist. The villain was worse than you thought. The challenge, I was with the team this morning, 7 out of 10 transformation projects fail. Why? We started looking at the data. You've got these shocking stats that the audience goes, really? By 2030, 80% of the workforce are going to need to reskill, going to need totally different jobs. Everyone listening to this right now, 80% by 2030, new skills. Really? That soon? I might need a new job that doesn't even exist yet. Surprise is going on. And there's tons of work about it you can check out on the website, but the headline of that story is that surprise intensifies every other emotion by 400%.
Yeah, I think you mentioned, yeah,
Make
you're
stories
right.
memorable.
You mentioned in your website a study where, yeah, neuroscientists suggest that they intensify things by 400%. That's fascinating. Now, Jeremy, as we approach the end of our conversation, I told you at the beginning that there were a couple of reasons why I very much like what you do. There's another one which I didn't mention, which is the fact that, at least that's what I see externally following you, mainly on LinkedIn, is that for you, there's a clear purpose behind why you do what you do. Correct me if I'm wrong, which goes beyond just storytelling and the obsession you have for storytelling. I know, for example, and this could be just one example, or it could be the most important thing for you, I don't know. We were talking about Al Gore before, so I know that you are very much into climate, climate protection. And for example, I saw that you are the author of Tell Stories That Matter, which is linked to the UN United Nations Sustainability Goals, which we follow as well in our company. And to me, those things, that level of purpose, which is larger than ourselves, larger than our area of expertise, is the most important thing. Would you like to tell us more about how you see these, your purpose, climate, telling stories that matter, the UN goals, whatever you'd like to share from this perspective?
Before anybody switches off, I'm not about to give you a climate lecture, I promise. How long should we do it in? 5 minutes?
5 minutes, yeah, that would be great.
Because you're right. The thing is, there's almost a higher level than that. Everyone's driven by different things. You know, many people, including, you know, a famous Simon that we mentioned before, have focused on their why, like what gets you out of bed. Not enough people in the business world certainly focus on that question, what gets you out of bed. We have a lot, especially in the technology world, especially in the consulting world, what keeps you up at night. And it's almost as if that thing that keeps me up at night is the problem that I'm able to come in and fix. So I can sell you some products or services or whatever, right? But it doesn't create long-lasting relationships. It looks like it's dealing with a very specific need. You also find out those are very transactional relationships, usually based on price. But I'm trying to get to what keeps you up at night. I'm much more interested in what gets me out of bed in the morning. Now, it may be that for that, a big part of it is climate. But if you look even beyond that, what I'm actually trying to do, which is why I've got this little sign behind me, I'm just trying to help other people to tell better stories about the things that inspire them. Now, if for you, that's climate change, awesome. If it's education, if it's women in tech, if it's poverty, clean water, like whatever the thing is, I just want to help more people tell better stories and tell better stories faster. I talk a lot about concepts like ikigai, which I think you've mentioned before on the show. And if anyone doesn't know it, Ikigai, it's a Japanese concept about finding your purpose, your reason for being. But a good one to end on, which is maybe the thing that gets me out of bed, is trying to help all of these people to tell better stories. In 2024, the average one of us, and now I believe this is in the Western world, but I'm still trying to find the exact demographic split of the data because I want it to be true. I don't just want to spout a stat that like a lot of people do. We speak about 20,000 words a day, and 74% of us have speech anxiety. We suffer from glossophobia, according to the National Institute of Mental Health. So that's a huge problem. I look at business leaders today, 4 out of 5 of them appear to be overwhelmed for the challenges that they're currently facing. I look at things like the Trust Barometer report that came out at Davos earlier this year. Great study. Anyone can Google it, get the data. Trust Barometer report. They do it every year. It's like the 25th. And that shows 88% of people are scared of losing their jobs. I think it's 64% of people say technology is changing in a way that's not good for me. People think business leaders are purposely trying to mislead. These are all communication problems. And they're all communication problems rooted in anxiety, fear, and stress. So if I can help, like you are, we're definitely on the same mission. If we can help people to tell better stories that can bring in tons of optimism, a lot more positive energy, that can help to influence things for the better, whatever that is, you know, fighting the climate crisis, you know, ethics and morals within AI, whatever your thing is, choose one of the 17 sustainable development goals. Just pick one if you haven't got one. Stories are going to change it. And it's why my favorite quote from Barack Obama is you can change the world just by sharing your story.
Love it. Love it. And we definitely share the same passion, the same obsession, the same values from this perspective, Jeremy. And if people would like to either connect with you or say hi or find out more about what you do, your work, where should they go? I'm
not on much social media for a lot of reasons. That may change soon. But LinkedIn, for all of its faults, it is quite a sketchy place a lot of the time, but I'm really active on LinkedIn and I'm very easy to find and I respond to almost everything. And betterstories.org is a website that I put together for free. You won't be able to contact me through that. It's just a nice resource of some cool stuff. But yeah, check me out on LinkedIn. Let me know what you think. Tell me everything you didn't agree with about today. And then we can have a follow-up and try and, put it right. But no, thanks for listening, everybody. And thanks for having me on the show. It means the world.
No, thank you, Jeremy. And before we close, last question. Is there a question I didn't ask? If you think about how to tell better stories, storytelling in general, business storytelling, is there a question that you would have loved for me to ask and I haven't? Is there anything something really important that I forgot?
Great question to drop in at the end. There probably is, actually, because there might be some people listening to this now that go, this has been a great conversation and you've talked about some high level stuff and some big names, but I'm down here working with this team. I'm just trying to inspire the 5 people around me or the 50 people within my startup or whatever. And it begs the question, really, can you change the world by sharing your story? Like, how many people does it actually take to change the world? It's great if you're in some great big boardroom somewhere. Mother Teresa once said, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. And for me, I look at small businesses, I look at startups, scale up, small groups within a large organization. Treat that like your family. Those are the people that you need to inspire with a story to bring about change. Don't think about changing the minds of thousands of people. Greta Thunberg said, no one's too small to make a difference. Like, I love that quote. And the reason it's true, and here's some homework for anybody else to finish on, when you say how many people does it take to change the world, it's 3.5%. It's not many. 3.5%. There's a whole rule about it. There's a TED Talk by Erica Chenoweth. But you want to change the hearts and minds of 100 people, you and 3 of your friends. The laws of influence and marketing. Given the right tools, the right timing, Kairos, given the right tools and the right environment, 3 to 4 people can influence the other 96 to change. Once you start scaling that up, the network effects, that's how movements happen. So I would just encourage anybody listening to this, I don't care how small you are, how young your business is, how much experience you do or don't have, everybody can change the world in some small way.
This is a perfect way to end this conversation. Jeremy, it's been fascinating, a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for your time, for your generosity, which I saw already before talking to you, just the very fact that you've put together their website, betterstories.org, because you can see with nothing behind it, rather than just the joy and the idea of sharing something useful with others. And you've done it today as well in this conversation. So I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And let's keep in touch.
Thanks again. Thanks, everyone.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like. So please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.